Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, here with a very special preview of this Saturday's Frizette and Champagne Stakes, which are both Breeders' Cup Challenge races where the winners get an invite to the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies and the Breeders' Cup Juvenile for the Frizette and Champagne, respectively. I have a very special guest, Acacia Clement, joining me today. But before we get to her, want to remind you to like this video and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. It's free to subscribe, and you get great notifications every time we get a new video uploaded here onto the channel. And we got a lot of content for you this week. Previews of the Champagne, the Frizette, the Breeders' Futurity, and the Alcibiades down in Keeneland, capping the card for the entire Saturday Keeneland card. Even have Matt Chapman from over in the United Kingdom joining me to do a preview of the races in Longchamp, highlighted, of course, by the Arc. So a lot of great content for you here on the NYRA Bets channel. But like I said, it's a big weekend up here in New York, a couple of big Breeders' Cup races, and wanted to bring in my colleague, Acacia Clement. Acacia, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me about a pair of really exciting 2-year-old races.
It is exciting. Thanks for having me, Matthew. And we do have Pippin here as well. He's on my lap like he is for the most Zoom calls that I do. He's kind of like right beneath the screen, but I always feel it's just polite to introduce the pets in that situation.
I love it.
But yeah, really looking forward to this weekend.
Yeah, and before we get into the two fields for the Frizette and the Champagne, one of the things that really stands out is just how strong these two preps have been over the last several years. Last year, of course, we saw Just FYI coming out of the Frizette to go on to win the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, and obviously he didn't win the Champagne, actually ran rather poorly in the Champagne, but of course Fierceness then came back out of this race to go on and win. But we've seen some other big names like Tiz the Law, Practical Joke, Jackie's Warrior, Jack Christopher, a lot of big names in these races. So it really speaks to the fact that there's some big potential stars in this year's field.
There really are. And also, I think the fields came up really strong this year with 10 each in the Frizette and the Champagne. That's really exciting. I think Chad Brown's duo with Senza Parole and Chancer McPatrick have not really scared anybody away. And as I often talk about, with these 2-year-olds, there's so much progression that can happen from race to race at this time of year. And I think Fierceness is a great example. Like you said, I mean, that was our first kind of clue of the two sides of Fierceness, in that Todd Pletcher just didn't have an answer for how poorly he ran in the Champagne. But these races are, yes, they're very important. They're grade ones. They're very special races for 2-year-olds, but they're also big stepping stones for them onto some further distances and some tougher competition as well. And, sometimes you'll have maidens taking a shot in here. It's all about the progression for the 2-year-olds at this time of the year.
Absolutely. And you see this on a daily basis being down in the paddock, but it's always amazing just to see the physical maturation that some of these horses take in just a month in between maybe their maiden victory and their second run. And so that it's, I think sometimes you're probably even surprised when you see a horse come in and go, wow, you didn't look like this, last time out. Or, maybe a horse just kind of leveled out, was very impressive in debut, but maybe didn't get any bigger second time out or third time out.
Absolutely. And I think those are the most important things to be looking for. Physically and mentally, did the horse progress? Sometimes, I mean, there are a couple that I can think of. I won't name any names right now, but there are a couple that I can think of that have gone the opposite direction, that have not progressed like you'd like to see. And so I do think that that is really a big key, like I said, for this time of year. And also distances. I mean, they're going to be going a mile for the first time, most of them this weekend. And some of them I don't think get better with more distance. So I think that that's going to be a challenge as well. But you can certainly understand wanting to see where they fit and taking a shot at this stage of the game.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, let's talk about the first of these two, which is the Frizette. Grade one, like you mentioned, we have that 1-turn mile up here, as opposed to the Alcibiades and the Breeders' Futurity taking place down in Keeneland, which are both a mile and a 16th in 2 turns. So slightly different setup preparing for the Breeders' Cup. But like I said, this one's for the 2-year-old fillies. You mentioned field of 10 here. I do feel like we have to start with the Chad Brown favorite, Senza Parole, who just absolutely ran a hole in the wind in debut. It just looks so impressive. But this is an interesting field because I feel like there's a couple of other horses that are worth consideration.
There really are. And, in that debut, I was in the paddock for her first race, Senza Parole, and she just dazzled out on the track. And I know we have the replay of that race, because winning by 7 3/4 lengths with a 94 buyer as a 2-year-old is just dazzling. And she was always in control throughout. You can see her in the orange and green Don Alberto silks, and the horse chasing her finished second in Stunner was one who was really highly touted for Brad Cox. She came back and won impressively in her subsequent start with an 86 buyer speed figure. So she really was the goods. She just ran into a filly who was so ready to roll at first asking. And it's funny because she's not much to look at, Senza Parole. She's on the smaller side. She's a kind of a lighter frame. And it's funny, I remember speaking to Chad Brown after the race and interviewing him, and he said she's so much more racy looking for her sire. You're used to seeing the progeny of Gunrunner be kind of really solid and very powerful in the way that they're built. And she's not. I mean, she's incredibly athletic and she was very spicy. She certainly has that dominant attitude prior to the race. But I am really excited to see how she does progress. She has the pedigree to suggest that going longer would be no problem. And she was so impressive first time out that she's definitely a really exciting storyline here.
Absolutely. Another horse that I think is a little bit interesting and has developed quite a following is number 2, the Queen's MG, who is cross-entered down in the Alcibiades, but I would imagine they're going to stay up here and run up here in New York. But this one, Dylan Davis aboard yet again. What's so interesting about this horse is ran really well in the Schuylerville, obviously just absolutely blew out the field in the Adirondack, and tried to make that clean sweep of all the fillies 2-year-old stakes races. But I don't know if she just didn't really like the muddy sealed track that day in the spinaway. Maybe she's a little bit distance limited. I'm not sure, but this is one who has some big victories. And it's going to be interesting because you might get a little bit more of a price, but I'm interested in your thoughts on whether or not you think a mile is what suits her best, or whether maybe she's better at 6.5.
I don't like more ground for her. I thought in the spinaway last time, I thought the 7 furlongs was stretching it a little bit when comparing her to her competition. I think the world of Immersive and Quiet Side, the top 2 finishers from the spinaway, I think they are 2 really talented fillies and ones that I'm big fans of. And just seeing a filly like the Queen's MG in comparison in there, to me, she just wasn't quite at that same level when trying to get the added distance. Now, I can certainly understand wanting to take another shot at it because it was aggressively raining that day, having been out there all afternoon on the day of the spinaway. So there is always the question, did she just not handle the wet track? So I think it will be interesting, like I said, being able to see her amongst this competition. Does she kind of stand out? And maybe I will have a higher opinion of her when seeing her again, kind of out of those elements. But I was against her in the spinaway after seeing her in the paddock, like I said. So I'm proceeding with caution, but I think that the most important thing for my job is to be open-minded and yes, have notes to compare on, but to be okay if somebody changes your mind in the paddock too. So I certainly will be looking for that. But my first inclination, just based off my notes and what I saw from last time, is that I just don't prefer more distance for her.
So I'm curious, you talked about regression from some horses, progression from other horses. We have a couple of last out maiden winners in this field. I'm curious if there's any that really speak to you and you think maybe could take a step forward, or another horse outside of Senza Parole who you think might be able to challenge her, or maybe just be a really interesting choice to use underneath in some other vertical exotics.
Well, I think I think Icona Mama is a little intriguing because of her experience at the distance and finishing third in the Pocahontas last time out. But actually, the 2 horses that I'm most interested in are the 2 maidens in here, in Scottish Lassie and Snow White. I was in the paddock for their race, and I loved both of them. It's just the winner, Quick Kick, was the one with experience. It was going 7 furlongs, and she was the horse that I just felt was most ready at that day. And I'd written down that both of these fillies in here, Snow White and Scottish Lassie, were ones that I wanted to see next time and with more distance. Scottish Lassie was one who had been training in the morning with Jody's Pride, who's a very talented stakes winning filly for Jorge Abreu. And I wrote down, wants distance, big, long stride, incredibly athletic. And the same thing with Snow White. I said, good size, demeanor says more distance. She showed speed just second best, like I said, to a more experienced foe. So obviously it's deep waters. They're going into a grade 1, but they're both getting more distance and they both have experience under their belt now.
Yeah, and you're always going to be able to get a little bit of a price on those maidens, so
Mhm.
I think that's going to be particularly intriguing. I also have to. My love of musicals also leads me to really like Scottish Lassie quite a bit. I love the musical Brigadoon from back
Yeah,
in the day with Gene Kelly that takes place in Scotland, and so
a
a cute
classic.
name for a daughter of
Yeah.
Mackenzie.
Yes.
And one of the horses I'll just quickly mention that I am going to give another chance to, which a horse I was really high on going into the Spinaway, which is the number 3 Pondering for Brendan Walsh. This
I
was one
totally
who I
agree.
thought looked so good on debut. And I just thought, I was out there on the track with you that day when it was aggressively raining, like you said, and she just really looked like she did not like the conditions at all that day. And we're expecting nice weather this weekend up here in New York. She gets Flavian Pratt aboard now. I'm willing to go back to this one and maybe try one more time to see. I think she's going to be able to put a much better foot forward on Saturday as opposed to last time out.
I could not agree more. I think Maggie Wolfendale actually picked her in the Spinaway because she just is so good looking, and she's built like one that wants distance as well. So, I mean, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? You've got horses that you write down, you want to see them get more distance, and then typically, I think you look at them at an individual basis first, and then you have to look at how they compare to their competition. I think in this case with racing, sometimes that really is the best key because maybe they individually have progressed, but if they don't necessarily stack up to what they're facing on that afternoon, at the end of the
Mhm.
day, it just doesn't matter as much because of the competition and what they're in against. So I think that that'll be interesting with all of these horses that I think have an opportunity to take a step forward. But I totally agree. Pondering did not seem to love the wet weather.
Yeah. Yeah, she and I have something in common. So,
Same.
from that day. Well, listen, the Frizzette's going to be a great race, but let's go to the Champagne for the boys. Again, going a mile, one turn, 2-year-olds on the dirt. And again, starting with the Chad Brown favorite here, Chancellor McPatrick on the far outside, a horse that I listen. The 2 times I've seen this horse run, which is the only 2 times the horse has run, at the top of the stretch, I thought there was no chance this horse was going to win either of the races. And an incredible late turn of foot and just an incredible acceleration, and seems to be just getting stronger with every following stride. He looks like he's going to get a fair amount of pace in this setup as well. I mean, he looks pretty tough in this spot. I mean, because we saw him in the hopeful. It's going to be hard, I think, to maybe get past him. I'm interested in your thoughts on it, maybe how this race sets up and just his running style in general, which doesn't give a lot of room for error necessarily.
No, it doesn't. And he seems like he's a bit of an odd horse as well because in his debut, he kind of got shuffled back.
Yeah.
And Flavian Pratt said that all of a sudden he just kind of started taking him forward. And he said, okay, well, let's see what's in the tank here. And there turns out there was a lot in the tank. And he kind of had a similar type of trip where he dropped back in the hopeful and then came running. And so he does that. He just kind of puts himself behind it. And yes, he should get the pace setup that typically you see a lot of 2-year-olds coming out of wire to wire wins or using their speed to their advantage. So sometimes you will really have a chance as they all kind of stack up against each other to come from off of it, like Chancellor McPatrick could. But it is something I think that's worth a question moving forward. Is that running style going to get him in some trouble? Is he going to start encountering some traffic? He's been able to kind of make those big sweeping moves. And don't get me wrong, he was very impressive. And I think as he continues to get more ground and lengthen that stride, he's only going to get even better. But yeah, I think it's just something to think about moving forward. But I do think he looks quite tough in this Champagne.
Yeah, obviously, what's interesting is watching the head on
Mhm.
of his maiden win. I was taken coming down the backstretch. I was taken by how he really didn't like the kickback. I mean, he
Yeah.
was kind of throwing his head up at one point, just really didn't like it. And so it's interesting. I actually think drawing a little further outside might be beneficial, just kind of keeping him out in the clear. You mentioned the traffic. If you're going to have to try to pass 9 other horses, being stuck on the inside or being in between, it can be a little uncomfortable. This is a horse that presumably can take plenty of distance. And so just
Mhm.
keeping him out of trouble and keeping him wide might not be a bad idea. But there's a lot of other nice horses in this race. You have Tip Top Thomas. You have a horse like, Moplex as well, who's a multiple stakes winner. So there are some other options here, I think, if you want to try to beat the favorite and Chancer.
I think there are as impressive as Senza Parole was at first asking, and she is, it almost feels like the Frizette's a little bit more wide open to me. Whereas
Hmm.
here, I don't think it's kind of, signed, sealed, delivered. But I do think it is Chancer McPatrick's race to lose. I think the
Yeah.
other most accomplished horse in the field is Moplex, who won the Sanford and who won the Funny Side last time. But it wasn't, it wasn't the most dazzling performance of the Funny Side. And he was kind of his own worst enemy in there, right? He broke out at the start.
Yeah.
He stumbled. He was drifting late, and then all of a sudden he came back and he finished. But he is undefeated. But those have all been sprint distances. Now, physically, just from the way that he is put together, I think more distance should help. Mentally, I am concerned about more distance because he is one that he expends a lot before the race even begins. I mean, you'll see Jeremiah Engelhardt on his head. He's always a little bit chatty, kind of dragging his handlers around the paddock. He was better last time, but that's something that he's going to need to improve and mature on as he gets more distance and as the waters get deeper. So he's undefeated. So I think, like I said, just based off of accomplishments, he's kind of the other big player in here. But I do think the distance based off his mentality is a big question.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's going to be interesting to see because you do have a horse like Tip Top Thomas,
Mhm.
who Irad Ortiz Jr. has chosen to ride over a horse like Uncaged, who he rode both those horses, I believe, in debut. And obviously, Tip Top Thomas, very impressive maiden winner, big buyer speed figure coming out of that maiden race. But you've mentioned regression before with these 2-year-olds, and obviously now stretching out a little bit. And I will say one of the things, at least, that I was impressed by in Tip Top Thomas's debut was that he really had to fight down the stretch. It was
Mhm.
not this sort of blowout victory where he just draws off by 7 or 8 lengths and you go, okay, well, nobody really looked him in the eye. He had a couple of horses, another horse bearing down on him, and he had another horse to his inside, Rookie Card, who really wouldn't go away. And so it was interesting to see just how he navigated that and still managed to get the win. Again, that's going to be a big asking, I think, for him to do this now and step up against this level of competition and a horse like Chancer on the outside, but certainly a talented runner and one that could potentially have a pretty bright future.
Yeah, I do think he looks very talented. I was not in the paddock for his first race, so I don't have any notes on him. But just looking at who he faced first time out, Rookie Card did come back and run second in his subsequent start. He regressed a little bit and actually looked like he was going to win before he just got run down.
Yeah.
But Sovereignty, who I think was against a biased racetrack and just getting to another talented horse in Praetor, he finished second in his subsequent start and actually improved his buyer speed figure 10 points. And those are the only 2 horses to run back. So I think it's actually a very live race that Tip Top Thomas comes out of. I think that he comes out of a pretty strong group, and I think that buyer speed figure is legit. So it could be interesting to see what he does stretching out. He's volatile. You kind of think with that quick and early and sprinting. So that'll be a big question. Whereas with Uncaged being by Curlin, he has much more of the pedigree to say, longer is better with him. But obviously, both of those have an opportunity to take a step forward second time for Todd Pletcher.
Yeah, and Uncaged, more of kind of a mid-pack horse too, might get a
Mhm.
similar sort of setup. And with the regards to, if Chancer maybe gives himself too much to do, maybe a horse like Uncaged gets the jump a little bit and is able
Mhm.
to just have a little bit of an easier trip sitting off the pace. It's interesting to see how this is going to play out. You mentioned that Tip Top Thomas race. I'll be honest, that third place horse, Key Waden, that's the horse I can't wait to see
I
run back.
know, I know. I
That
want
horse
to
was
see
coming
him
like a
run back. I
freight right at the end.
agree. I agree.
So I mean, I'm excited to see that horse come back. And obviously, a horse, somebody like Dallas Stewart has Smoking Wicked in this race, who I thought ran a perfectly respectable fourth in the hopeful that day. Certainly an honest runner. I don't really think a win candidate, but maybe one to use or consider underneath.
Mhm.
And then Executive Order, another one who stepping up, certainly in class, but looked good in debut. And so interesting to see this group, but I agree with you. I mean, I think it kind of starts and stops with Chancer in terms of where you have to, from a handicapping standpoint and potentially even a betting standpoint. Feels like this one, you're like you said, maybe a little more less wide open, I should say, than the Frizette.
It kind of feels that way. Maybe we'll be saying the exact opposite on Sunday after these races come turn out on the track. But yeah, I think looking at it on paper and just what he's accomplished so far, it does appear that way. But like I said at the start, one of the most fun things about this time of year is seeing which 2-year-olds are really going to continue progressing.
Absolutely. Well, Acacia, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today to talk about these two races. We got a lot of coverage, obviously, for America's Day at the Races on Saturday. Do you know when you're going to be on? If you're going to be on, how
Yes,
much you're
I
going to be
will
on?
be. Yes, I believe Maggie's off this week, so I'll be
Okay.
reporting throughout the week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So I think Saturday I'm on from like 12 to 4.
Okay.
So throughout the afternoon. So yeah, looking forward
Excellent.
to it.
Very good.
I'm
Well, make
glad that if I'm out in the paddock, knock on wood, there's not
sure.
rain or, sub 50-degree temperatures in the forecast yet, because
Yeah.
we all know
No,
how I struggle. Yeah,
fingers crossed. It looks
I
quite
know.
nice.
Uh,
And we're also happy for Sunday looks quite nice for the Miss Grillo
yes,
remake from
pretty
last week. So
excited.
that also looks good for the turf. So we're happy for all of that. And well, appreciate your time again. And thank you all for watching this video previewing the Frizette and the Champagne. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube. For Acacia Clement, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.